See Frederick's Appliance.
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
All right, 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. If you've been listening to our show for a while, you know that we speak to a lot of authors, and those authors run the gamut. If you go into the library or to the bookstore, you will see pretty much all of the authors. In fact, before Christmas, Robin went to go buy a book for one of her relatives, and I went into Barnes & Noble with her, and as I'm looking around, I'm looking at all of the names of the people we've interviewed, and it was like, wow, this is where our celebrities come from. We don't have too many movie stars. We have occasionally a movie star, TV star, but our celebrities are from the world of authors and literature, and which is a cool thing. One of the authors we've never had is the lady, and I can't remember her name, that wrote the Harry Potter books.
Oh, yeah.
Made a real famous name for herself.
J.K. Rowling's.
Thank you. And I bring her up for this reason, and she probably has inspired more children to read than anybody that I can remember in local time, in recent time. Maybe Dr. Seuss, but as far as actually reading large books with lots of words and not as many pictures, right? She probably is one that we can credit with that. And I remember having discussions with people who were not happy with the content. They said, well, it's witchcraft and it's not healthy for the children. And I remember trying to defend the whole thing, saying, you know what? If a child is reading, then they are developing their reading skills. They're developing their interest in reading, and why not? Why not let them read something? They're not buying into that. They're not believing that's real.
Yeah,
I mean, you might have a couple of kids that you need to speak to, but I don't know. I think most kids, especially if they're reading, they're probably pretty smart. I am speaking out of line by saying that maybe our next guest agrees with us on that. And he'll tell us if he does or he doesn't. But he is on the phone. He's a teacher, a researcher, a creator of collaborative inquiry curricula with students. His name is Jeffrey D. Wilhelm. He has written a book himself. It's called Reading Unbound: Why Kids Need to Read What They Want and Why We Should Let Them. And I agree with that. The implementation of the Common Core is also part of what we're going to speak about, and I know that's another issue that becomes very controversial. Jeffrey Wilhelm. Good morning, Jeffrey.
Hey, good morning, Larry and Robin.
Thank you for calling and for being on the show with us. Where are you?
Boise, Idaho.
In Idaho. Okay. Cold up there, isn't it?
Not too bad.
I'm trying to rub it in.
But beautiful snow-covered mountains.
See that?
Wow.
See, he turned it around. He made me feel bad. Now I want to be where he is.
That's right.
I was trying to make you feel like you wanted to be here. Well, anyway, thank you for being on the air with us. Before we talk about the Common Core, is Reading Unbound, did I describe it well when I was talking about reading? I don't know if you call it frivolous, but I mean entertainment reading, you know?
Well, you know, Larry, the reason I did the study is because I've had a free reading program in the schools where I've worked for many years, and it's very hard to explain how you'll get kids who love reading Harry Potter or Hunger Games or even back in the day Babysitter's Club or R.L. Stine,
right,
and who won't do their schoolwork, you know, who just love to read, but they won't read anything that's assigned in school. It's also difficult to understand the passion of parents who come in on Parents' Night and say, can't you get him to read something else, something better, something healthier? And it's almost as if they think you're mainlining the kids' junk food. And I would say to the parents, you know, it's a free choice program, and this is what he's choosing to read. But I didn't really have any other evidence other than what you said, that, hey, if he's reading, that's good. And if he's reading, he'll become a better reader. But I didn't have any other evidence to support the choices the kids were making. So that's why I engaged in this study, to find out what are kids who read these books that make their parents nervous or their teachers nervous or news commentators nervous, what are they actually getting out of these books? And what we found was they were getting a lot of profound pleasures and psychological satisfactions and meeting a lot of needs that they have at that point in their life. And we came away with this mantra: kids read what they need. And we ought to trust them, or at least ask them, why do you love this book? What are you getting out of it? Because you're going to be surprised what they tell you.
Wow. I'm going to interject into this conversation something I was told a long time ago. I guess it was another interview by a psychologist who used the phrase setting yourself up for betrayal. And I love that phrase because it's something I've always kind of, once I understood what it meant, I always tried to avoid it. I don't want to set myself up for betrayal. And what that would mean in this conversation is that if you say, all right, look, no Harry Potter until you read, Algebra 101 or something, right? Okay, Mom. And then they're going to betray you because guess what? They're probably not going to read it.
Yeah.
Am I right about that? What do you think?
Well, I do think that you can't repress kids' natural needs. If you do, it's going to lead nowhere good. Carl Jung, the famous depth psychologist, had a favorite quote from the Gnostic Gospel of St. Thomas, and it read something like this, that which is within you, if repressed, will destroy you, but if brought into the light, will redeem you. And that's what we found with these kids, with their reading, but even with their gaming. If the parents tried to control it, it couldn't be done. But if you tried to link it to what you wanted for them, then that would work. For instance, right now, I'm teaching 1984, but I said to the kids, hey, let's read The Hunger Games together. I know a lot of you have already read it, but let's read the first book together, and then we'll read 1984, and we'll see what are the similarities and differences. Well, everybody was so keen on reading The Hunger Games and talking about the movies, and of course the new movie came out in the meantime. Uh-huh. And now we're having a great discussion of 1984. So I leveraged what they care about and what's popular in their culture to a consideration of 1984, which is something I have to teach and want them to understand. So that's a much more fruitful way that doesn't set me up for betrayal.
Okay.
Said to me, hey, you gave us quid, we give you quo, by which he meant, hey, you read one of ours, we'll read one of yours, and we'll see what they have in common. And I think that's a much more fruitful way to go. As a parent, read a book that your kid loves to read with them, and then maybe say, hey, you know what? If you liked this, I think you might like Brave New World. Let's read that one together, or whatever. And even if the kid doesn't, then they know there's other books in this genre that he can progress to.
But this is also good for their career choices because sometimes inadvertently when they're reading a story, they might not know something exists, and then all of a sudden their interest gets piqued, and then they're on a career path and they want to do whatever it is that they find enjoyment with.
Well, what we found in the study, Robin, was that pleasure is central to expertise. People become expert at things that they find really pleasurable, and they become expert and they find pleasure in things that you're becoming competent at. And this leads only good directions. There's a very famous study called the British Cohort Study that began in 1970. They followed, I believe it's 17,000 people who were born in the same week in England, Scotland, and Wales. And what they've been finding in their analysis is the single most important factor in social attainment, social satisfaction, and career success is how much pleasure reading you did throughout your life. And it actually is much more explanatory, 3 times more explanatory than your parents' educational attainment and socioeconomic status. So it's unbelievable how pleasure reading leads to social attainment and to success in career in a generalized fashion, not just the specific way you're referring to.
Oh, wow. And the thought that I had in preparing for this interview, I don't know if this applies or not, but I guess I'm just using me for this one. The books that I really shied away from, that I wasn't interested in when I was a kid, suddenly I am interested in. There's some subjects that I suddenly find very interesting. World War I is an example. It was like so boring to me to read about World War I. I don't know. It seemed too far away to be interested in. Or the Civil War. Uh-huh. You know, the only war I wanted to read about was World War II because my dad was in it, so that made it interesting. But I wasn't really as a kid. Now I am now. And I guess the connection between reading for pleasure is that if you read for pleasure, then you are honing your reading skills Simple, like that. So that later on in life, you can maybe pick up. But obviously, if you're learning a course, if you have to learn what's in 1984, for example, in your class, you can't wait until you're 60 years old to read it. Obviously, right?
Well, Larry, you're bringing up two really important points, that we get good at what we do. So the more you read, the better you get at reading.
Yeah.
And the more pleasure you find in reading, the more you're going to do it. And the more choice you have in reading, the more you're going to do it, because you get to stake your identity, which is the primary task of adolescence. But your other important point is you're building what in psychology we call schema, background knowledge. And the more background knowledge you have, the more access you have, the more interest you develop in new things. The Hunger Games makes my kids interested in 1984. Makes them interested in tyrannical regimes and the rise of fascism. Makes them interested in other dystopian novels. So when you build the schema, you're building interest and you're building background knowledge and competence to do new things that were previously unavailable. George Hillox, who's at the University of Chicago, has famously said, learning is moving from the known to the new, and that humane teaching is taking what kids already know and already care about and bridging to the new. And that's the kind of thing we found happening naturally in the study. The kids were reading things that led them to read other things, and they were sharing reading with other readers that made them want to read other things. So they were not only becoming better readers, they were becoming more diverse readers and more knowledgeable people. There was a kid in the study who was African American, and he was very uninterested, he said, in reading about civil rights or reading about the history of slavery. But he said, but I love slave narratives, because he could relate to them, right? That it was a person who he could live through that experience with.
Right.
And then he would learn a lot about slavery in that way, that then was building his interest toward perhaps reading more widely about civil rights issues.
And that also helps with the siblings also, because once you have the older sibling that is into reading and really enjoys it, the younger sibling might just pick up on that, and then they will read to each other.
There was a boy in our study named Patrick, and he read a book that his sister had suggested to him called Tuck Everlasting, and he didn't like it. And she said to him, no, you missed it. You missed the point. This is why it's so great. Read it again. And he did. Now, that was astonishing to us, because often siblings don't get along, and this was a sister and a brother. But he valued reading, and he valued the experience of reading, and he valued his sister's experience of reading so much that he read the book twice to try to figure out why does she love it so much, as a way of relating to her. We had another sibling pair in the study, and the older sister got the younger brother to start reading Harry Potter by doing role-playing together. So what's happening here is that there's a social leveraging, but also there's an awareness and availability in the home, because the siblings and the parents have books lying around. And we found that the kids would pick up books and read things that were in the classroom or in the home that they wouldn't go to the library or the bookstore to pick up. So the availability of a wide variety of things, encouraged the kids to read, and they would pick stuff up and give it a shot.
Oh, wow. Jeffrey Wilhelm is our guest, and he is a teacher, researcher, creator of collaborative inquiry curricula with students. His book is called Reading Unbound, Why Kids Need to Read What They Want and Why We Should Let Them, and some fascinating results from the study that he's been doing. Now, let's connect that to the topic, and before we do this, I would just want to make sure it's not unfair to connect what you're talking about to the Common Core, and if it is, we'll because I'm trying to figure out why it was coupled with your topic today.
Well, what's very interesting, of course, is the Common Core is the major educational policy issue of the day. And if you look at the Common Core, the anchor standards for reading, for writing, they're all very sensible. They all match what we know from cognitive science that expert readers and writers do. So they're very reasonable, they're specific, they can be focused on. However, my critique would be what's missing. And one of the things that's missing is pleasure. So how is a kid going to become motivated to do the really hard work that's going to help them to meet the Common Core? Well, unless you've got really engaging and compelling and motivating instruction that the kids take joy and pleasure in, they'll never engage to the degree, and they'll never read the amount of the kind of books they need to read to achieve competence on those standards. Here's another thing. Part of the Common Core is about text complexity and getting the kids to read harder and harder text. Well, our study would lead us to critique that emphasis, because what we found were that the kids in our study were doing what we would call interpretive complexity. In other words, they were doing the things that the anchor standards require, that expert readers do, with text that would not be defined as complex by the standards. So we're arguing, hey, if the standards are the thing, if these are the moves that expert readers make, and we can use the Hunger Games or Harry Potter or things closer to home to the kids to get them to engage in that interpretive complexity, that's way more important than the textual complexity. And one of the worries we have is that these kids in our study were all passionate readers, and all of them critiqued school reading. We were in one class where there were 30 kids who were all supposedly reading this book, and none of them were trying. It was a Shakespeare play. And we coded over 30 ways to fool your teacher that you were trying to read it, even though you weren't. So what were the kids learning in that classroom?
Oh, wow.
They weren't how to cheat. They weren't learning about the great themes of literature or how to read dramatic scripts or anything like that. They were learning how to cheat. But when they were engaged in their free reading, which they had a totally different attitude about, you know, they were loving it and enjoying it and reading on a thematic level because they were trying to apply it to their lives and the kind of people that they wanted to be in the world. Now, Shakespeare could certainly be taught that way, but it's typically not, and it's further from home for the kids. I'm not saying not to teach Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. I want my kids reading Shakespeare. But you pointed it out, Larry, that you're reading things now as an adult that you totally get, that you didn't get as a high school student.
Right,
so let's pay attention more to the kids and where they are and what they need right now, and let's trust them to be part of that conversation. One of the things I'm doing now as a result of the study is not doing summer reading programs, because we had a kid in the study who said, great, school ruins your reading for 9 months, and then they have a summer reading program that ruins it for the summer.
Oh, gosh.
So
that's
what we're
funny.
doing now is we're saying, hey, let's set up a reading plan. You tell us what you're going to read and what you're going to do with the reading. And we might make some suggestions, like, oh, if you love, Harry Potter, you might also like, these fantasy novels or whatever. But we're allowing them to stake their identity, and we're allowing them to do what adults do, which is to choose your own reading agenda and pursue your own reading life. And that's how you end up reading hundreds of books and becoming an expert reader with diverse interest and knowledge.
There might have been a teacher who stumbled upon your theory here when I was a kid, and I've already revealed that Robin and I are closing in on 60, so this is going back. But I remember the Romeo and Juliet was like torture.
Yeah.
Think of Shakespeare. And the teacher taught us instead about West Side Story. And so maybe the teacher did exactly what you are suggesting, get something where, for some reason, we didn't see that the two stories were the same, basically. And so the teacher, and I don't even remember if it was a male or a female teacher, so I'll just say she because it probably was a lady. But I believe she brought West Side Story to the class, and we had to read it, not just listen to the record, because she brought the record in too. But she would do that. She would play like a cut from the record, and then we'd have to read a bunch of the West Side Story.
Okay.
And then she said, by the way, remember that other story, Romeo and Juliet? Does anybody see the similarities? And maybe the girls got it, but I don't think most of us guys were like, oh. So it almost sounds like what you're talking about, Jeffrey.
Oh, yeah, that's a very smart move by that teacher, because she took something close to home that was near to your experience, that was accessible, and she used it as a bridge to something that was harder. And she used the same angle, which is what's making and breaking the relationships in West Side Story as compared to Romeo and Juliet. So she took an inquiry angle that was applied, that you could apply to your own lives. And that's exciting and it's interesting. And I'd have to mention that she's meeting all the reading standards in the Common Core by doing that.
Oh, wow. And who knew? Who knew?
And that is
by rich, engaging instruction.
But that is very, very insightful, too, because as soon as anybody is told what to do, they have to do this, they're automatically going to rebel. And by just allowing them to discover things on their own, you can decrease that possibility.
Robin, it's a really smart point. There's a very famous adolescent psychologist named Erik Erikson, and he found that the primary task of adolescence, the developmental challenge of adolescence, is staking your identity, which you do through your evolved interest and your evolving competence and choices. So if we tell kids what to do, we're operating against their developmental need as adolescents to become more independent, to make choices, to develop competence and interest. If you integrate choice and pleasure into the curriculum, and it could be limited choice. It could be, we're going to read Romeo and Juliet, but here's several other novels or studies or nonfiction pieces about relationships that you get to choose to read, and you then try to see the comparisons. Well, all of a sudden, they get to stake their identity. They get to pursue evolving interests and competence, and all of a sudden we're working with the developmental needs. If you're being told what to do all the time, and this is true of adults, but especially true of adolescents, you can't stake your identity. And so what's your only option for doing it? Resistance. And we saw a lot of kids in this study and other studies we've done who resisted because it was their only option. One kid said, I'd rather say reading is stupid than maybe look like I might be stupid. So he was resisting school to stake his identity in a positive way because he felt if he colluded with school, he would just look stupid.
Wow.
And obviously, we all want to stake our competence by looking smart. If you choose what you want to read, you're going to read something that you can do and that you can talk about, and now you're staking your identity in a positive way.
Jeffrey, you are a fabulous teacher. Let me just say, I hope that somebody in your community recognizes how well you are doing your job as a teacher. I mean, we can hear it. I can just tell it. I mean, there's so many different things about what you've said and the passion with which you say these things. Reading Unbound is the book. And do you think that the book is going to be attracted, or people are going to be attracted to the book who are teachers, parents, or pretty much the general public? Who's going to be attracted to this book?
We wrote the book to be informative to teachers, parents, and policymakers. And although I usually write for teachers, we're trying to cast a wider net here and get it into the hands of parents and the policymakers. So we know it's written in a way that will be very informative and fun for parents and policymakers, and we hope that it'll open some eyes and help people have a wider construal of what counts as literature and to rethink, well, if we really want kids to become lifelong readers and expert readers, what's the way to go about it? It's not to make them do harder things. It's to start with the pleasure, which will build the competence, which will help them do the harder things.
If I could just interject something about historical novels, even ones that kind of skew history a little bit. The Da Vinci Code comes to mind, because I know a lot of our listeners will say, you know what, well, you know what book I want my children to read? I want them to read the Bible. But let's say that they're not interested in the Bible. Not that they're opposed to religion. I'm not saying that. It's hard to read. It's like Shakespeare in a way.
Yeah.
So let's say they get the Da Vinci Code, which is very exciting, but makes mistakes or has some inaccuracies or something. But still, it might be the thing. Says, oh, let me read the actual thing, And I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Well, it makes perfect sense. When I've had kids read the Da Vinci Code in my free reading program, I'll usually say to them, hey, how much of this is historically accurate, and how could you find out? And does it matter? And you start getting in some very big inquiry questions which historians take up. Pocahontas, the movie, the Disney movie, is totally erroneous. The Patriot, the movie with Mel Gibson, is totally erroneous. Is that okay? Is it okay that we get a generation of kids thinking the Pocahontas story is something other than what it was? My answer would be yes, that's a problem. But it's a great thing to engage kids in, because now they're thinking like historians, and they're thinking about what is responsible history and to what degree should authors be responsible to source material. And now they're thinking really, really hard about the stuff we want them to think about, but they're doing it with the thing that interested them.
Wow. I'm loving this interview,
This is
Jeffrey.
great.
We ran out of time, and I didn't even realize we were at the end already, but what a great conversation. I can just to reiterate, you must be. The students who are under you are lucky, and I'm sure that they know
I'll
it.
tell them you said so.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
That's
Where'd you
right.
say you are? Des Moines? Is that where you are?
Idaho, Boise.
Oh,
I'm in Boise,
Boise.
Idaho, my friend.
I was
Beautiful Boise, Idaho, the city of trees.
All right, Reading Unbound. How do we get the book, and do you have a website?
I've got a website, which is jeffreywilhelm.com, but the best place to get them is amazon.com, or the cheapest is scholastic.com, or go to your local bookseller and tell them to order in some books.
Reading Unbound is what it's called. Jeffrey D. Wilhelm is the author, and if you don't have the opportunity to write that down and you want it repeated, feel free to call us. We'll be glad to do that. Or easier than that, go to WOCA.com, the radio station website. You'll see Jeffrey's name at the 10:05 slot on the guest list for today. And Robin already put the Jeffrey's website as well as Scholastic.com, and of course the other information you'll need to get the book. Jeffrey, thank you for being on the air with us today.
Thanks, Larry and Robin. It was a great pleasure.
It really was. We'll take a little break and we'll be right back.
Hi, Robin. You look tired.
I am. I've been running all over town.
Why? Why not drive?
I need to get this stupid document notarized.
Well, that's easy. You need personal service.
Duh, that's what I've been looking for.
You need to go see Mark at the Personal Service Center. He can notarize that for you, make copies, fax it wherever, or send it out in the mail. Heck, he can even scan it and email it for you.
Really? Where is he at?
2375 Northeast 25th Avenue, on the corner of Northeast 25th Avenue and 24th Street. You can call him at 789-6683.